Hey there, welcome to Night Lectures, your daily dose of fascinating stories. He lived about 2,500 years ago. He was never called a professor, never received awards, and left behind neither a hospital nor an anatomy theater. Yet his name is known to every doctor, and to many who have never even been patients. Hippocrates, the father of medicine, a symbol of medical honor, scientific reason, and humanity. But who was he really? And why do we know so little about him for certain? In this video, we will try to approach the man behind the myth, to see how people healed in the ancient world before him, and what changed with his arrival. This is a story not only about medicine, but about the search for truth, about responsibility toward life, about how one man changed the way humanity sees health, and became a symbol for millions. Share your ideas for future videos in the comments and hit the subscribe button. New bedtime stories come out here daily. Before the name of Hippocrates became a symbol of medical ethics and reason, medicine in ancient Greece looked very different. Fragmented, ritualistic, at times close to mysticism, with no clear boundary between priest and healer, between spell and treatment, between tradition and observation. For most Greeks of the Archaic Age, disease was not caused by physical factors, but was seen as a sign of divine anger, broken harmony, or evil influence. The road to healing, therefore, lay not through diagnosis, but through purification. The centers of healing were temples of Asclepius, the god of medicine, son of Apollo, believed to have the power to raise the dead. Such sanctuaries, called Asclepeia, were spread throughout Greece, from the Peloponnese to the islands, from mainland cities to the colonies of Asia Minor. The most famous was the Asclepieion of Epidaurus, where the sick came not only from all corners of Hellas, but even from abroad. Patients underwent a ritual of purification, fasting, bathing, offering sacrifices, and sleeping within the sacred hall, the abaton, where, it was believed, the god appeared in dreams, healing them or revealing the cure. Inscriptions on stone and plaques from that time describe miraculous recoveries, a snake leaving a man's ear, sight restored, infertility cured, but none of these stories show any attempt to understand the cause of illness or to reproduce the result. Alongside temple healing existed a more earthly tradition of folk medicine, practiced by herbalists, bone setters, and midwives. They treated wounds, applied bandages, and brewed infusions from poppy, roots, and resins, yet rarely questioned why the remedies worked or failed. Their knowledge was practical but unsystematic, passed by word of mouth, often without understanding the principles behind it. Around this time, the first medical schools appeared in the Greek world, places where physicians sought not only to heal, but to understand what they were doing. Two became especially renowned, the Cnidian and the Coan schools. The Cnidian school, based in the city of Cnidus on the coast of Asia Minor, focused on classification. Diseases were broken into categories, symptoms carefully described and named. Yet their texts left little room for individuality. Patients were fitted to the disease, not the disease to the patient. It was rigid, almost geometric. Illness as a form to be matched to an existing pattern. The Coan school followed a different path. From it emerged the mode of thought that would later be linked to Hippocrates himself. Physicians on Kos paid attention not only to symptoms but to the person, to age, diet, climate, habits, and even temperament. They tried not just to name the illness but to understand why this person had fallen ill at this moment. It was the mindset of the observer doctor, the philosopher doctor, a man of causes and effects, not of gods and rituals. And though the Coan school existed before Hippocrates' birth, its true flourishing became inseparable from his name. On Kos, medicine grew into a discipline of study and debate. The small island was well connected. Trade routes crossed there, travelers and philosophers stopped by, and ideas from Asia Minor, Rhodes, and Cnidus mingled freely. There was a library, lectures were held, the works of anatomists and natural philosophers were discussed. Here medicine began to be seen as techne, an art requiring skill, experience, and reasoning. Among its early figures was Herodicus, not merely a physician but a forerunner of dietetics and physical therapy, who believed that disease arose mainly from an unhealthy way of life. His students began to view health as a dynamic balance rather than a divine gift. That way of thinking shaped the young doctors of Kos, including one who would soon change everything. In one of the island's medical families, where healing knowledge passed from father to son, a boy was born. No one knew then whether he would follow the tradition or choose his own path. But this child, a son of Kos, raised among observation, reasoning, and a constant search to understand man, would soon make medicine speak in a new language, not in spells, but in words accessible to reason. The name he received at birth was common in his family, Hippocrates. It was neither title nor omen. On Kos, to be born into a physician's household meant continuity, not destiny. His father, Heraclides, belonged to an ancient Coan line that traced its ancestry to Asclepius himself. Though such genealogies were more symbolic than factual, they mattered deeply in a world where knowledge was handed down through hands, where pupils became sons and sons, pupils. Tradition also claimed descent from Heracles, a hero symbolizing strength and will. This dual heritage, from the healer and the warrior, was likely more myth than record, yet it shaped the boy's imagination. From childhood, he lived among people who regarded pain not as a curse, but as a part of life, and who met suffering not with fear but with careful attention. Kos, surrounded by the Aegean, was no great city of philosophy, but it was a crossroads. Ships came from Athens, Rhodes, Phoenicia, and Asia Minor. Markets sold spices. Harbors murmured with foreign tongues. In this environment, the young Hippocrates learned to listen, to notice, to ask questions. His father taught him, not by lessons, but by example. The boy accompanied him to the sick, into homes smelling of herbs, temple chambers and fields where wounded men lay. He learned to read fever by the tint of skin, to judge health by a gait, to understand the silent language of the body. Early on, he began writing notes, not reflections but observations, what the patient ate, how long pain lasted, how breathing changed. These wax tablet notes would become a lifelong habit and the basis of an empirical method. Their house was modest but spacious, with a garden of olives, figs, and a patch of medicinal plants, mint, anise, sage, flax, lavender. There he learned pharmacy by touch and scent. He knew the look of celandine root, the smell of fresh hyssop, and which herb soothed fever pain. It was knowledge old as the hills yet fragile, without formulas or measures, poised between craft and faith. His mother, said to be of noble origin, kept the household, brewed herbal infusions, and helped in childbirth. Though seldom mentioned in biographies, she likely gave him patience and sensitivity. Not all lessons of a physician's home concern the body. Many concern time, when to wait, when to speak, when to be silent, when to let the body heal itself. As a youth, he was known for skepticism. He listened to tales of miracles but asked, how many days did the illness last? Who else in the family was sick? What food was eaten? He did not argue, he questioned. That quiet doubt was rare at his age. Legends tell that even young, he treated wounded soldiers and sailors with strange fevers arriving at Kos. Perhaps then he first realized that disease was not a curse but the result of lifestyle, food, water, and habits. Not fate's mark, but the body's signal. He observed the sea, the weather, the shifting complaints with the seasons. These first observations would later shape his work, on airs, waters, and places. He grew up where doctor meant not just the art of healing, but a duty to life, where body and soul were seen together, where man was part of the world, subject to the influence of stars, winds, habits, and memory. By the time he reached youth, Hippocrates knew his path would lead not to temple or sword. He would be neither priest, nor warrior, nor poet. He wished to be a physician, but unlike those before him. He wanted to understand what truly makes a person sick and what helps him recover, not through inspiration or ritual, but through observation, reasoning, and experience. Thus began his journey, the journey of a wanderer and a learner. When Hippocrates was about 20, he left the island, not forever, nor in rebellion, but because he knew that to become a new kind of physician, he must see the world. Kos had given him the essentials, herbs, observation, respect for the body, but beyond it lay what he did not yet know, other lands, other climates, other diseases. Records of his travels are blurred by time. Historians debate fact and legend, yet one thing seems certain. He spent many years far from home. He visited Asia Minor where he met doctors of the Cnidian school and, according to tradition, debated with them. They insisted on classification. He replied, "Look at the person, not the scheme." They prescribed medicine by symptom. He asked, "What does the patient eat? Where does he live? How does he sleep?" Then came Egypt, a difficult voyage, across the sea and up the Nile. Egypt already possessed millennia of medical practice, temples, texts, and anatomical knowledge. In Memphis, he may have seen records of fractures, surgeries, and eye treatments. Egyptian priest-surgeons had steady hands, could bandage, suture, and cleanse wounds. They distinguished symptom from cause, yet much remained under ritual. Hippocrates observed, but did not imitate blindly. Legends place him as far as Thrace and the shores of the Black Sea. Perhaps exaggeration, yet we know he visited regions of harsh climate, where people suffered from cold, poor diet, and new ailments. He noted how wind affected lungs, humidity joints, and lack of light the spirit. Ideas later found in his treatises, where climate became key to health. During his travels, he argued and he listened. He met philosophers. Tradition says he conversed with Democritus, attended lectures of Anaximander's and Heraclitus's followers. He never became a philosopher in the academic sense, but philosophy taught him to see health as balance, between body and environment, between organs, between inner and outer. He learned to think in causes and effects, to doubt, to seek reasons, yet to accept that much in nature remains beyond our grasp. A story from those years survives in later biographies. In the city of Abdera, an epidemic spread, fever, vomiting, rash. Local doctors were helpless. Hippocrates, arriving as a traveling physician, refused to treat by formula. He walked through homes, spoke with families, recorded diets, water sources, house structures. He noticed that the sick lived in low, misty areas, and that illness began after damp winds. He advised them to move to higher ground. Within weeks, the epidemic faded. Some said it was coincidence. He did not argue. But from then on, he believed, disease lives not only in the body, it comes from the environment. During these years, he began to write short notes, symptom descriptions, records of how illnesses evolved. He observed pulse, dryness of tongue, sweat as sign of crisis. These became the structure of clinical observation. He did not seek a universal cure. He sought understanding, how and when disease unfolds and when to step back. He saw death from infections, wounds, childbirth, and he formed a stark conviction. The physician is not omnipotent. His task is not to defeat death, but to do no harm. That was a revolution. In a world that demanded miracles, he began teaching humility, not to interfere when nature can heal, not to treat the incurable, not to offer false hope. When Hippocrates returned to Kos, he was no longer the obedient son, but a man who had seen worlds, diseases no book described, suffering no prayer could cure. He had no wealth, but he possessed the greatest treasure, experience, and with it, a new understanding. Medicine cannot be reduced to formula. It is born of careful, patient observation of life itself. He began to practice, not in temples or squares, but in homes, villages, and city quarters. He approached patients with patience, not haste. He asked, when did it begin? What was eaten? What is the source of water? How often are windows opened? Who else fell ill? What was the weather that morning? One pupil later wrote, Hippocrates could spend an entire day beside a bed, touching nothing, prescribing nothing, merely watching how breathing changed, how the hand rested, how the eyes reacted to light. He believed the body speaks. One must learn to listen. He treated through diet, not just food, but way of life. He prescribed routines, when to eat, sleep, move, what sounds to hear. Health, he said, is balance, and treatment must restore that balance. If the stomach is weak, food must be gentle. If illness worsens by evening, work should be done in the morning. He avoided extremes, neither starvation nor excess, neither cold baths nor burning heat. He healed with climate, literally. Seeing illness from dampness or fog, he advised moving towards sun and wind. He told students, a doctor must know the winds, the layout of streets, the taste of well water. Without this, one cannot understand why one house breeds sickness while another stays healthy. It was the first step toward medical geography, the idea that health depends on the interaction between body and environment. One case from these years became legend. A craftsman in Kos lay in agony from abdominal pain, refusing food, tossing in fever. 2 doctors had come before, one with warm broth, another with opium. Neither helped. Hippocrates examined the house, where the bed stood, when fresh food was last eaten, when the water was changed. He gave no medicine. He ordered the bed moved to the window and prescribed only barley broth with cumin and warm water. 2 days later, the pain subsided, not because he cured, but because he did not worsen. It became his creed. Do no harm. This did not mean passivity. It meant restraint. Do not act if uncertain. Do not pretend to heal when you do not know what you are doing. Nature fights for health. The physician's task is not heroism, but companionship. To stand beside, not to hasten decline, not to cause suffering where it might be avoided. Unlike the magicians common even in educated cities, who promised instant cures with rites and powders, Hippocrates promised no miracles. He said, "Sometimes illness is stronger than us. Sometimes the best act is none." He respected human faith, but he never allowed deceit. That was not scientific. It was humane. He approached surgery cautiously, not from fear, but from awareness. In his time, surgery was perilous. No antiseptic, no anesthesia, little anatomy. He did not forbid it when necessary. He knew how to lance abscesses, set dislocations, and splint fractures, yet he said, "Not every illness requires the knife." He preferred to heal with time, rest, and reason, and only in extremity, with the hand. One note of his reads, "If you see a disease you cannot halt, do not try to stop it by force. Watch, wait, observe. Perhaps it will cease on its own. If so, you were present. If not, you were not the cause of death." Thus he healed, thus he taught. Thus he created not merely a craft, but an ethic, one that would live for thousands of years. Whenever an epidemic enters history, society changes. People grow afraid, lose their reason, look for the guilty, and flee. But the physician remains. He goes where people are dying, not for glory or vanity, but because to retreat would be to cease being a physician. In the middle of the 5th century before our era, Athens was struck by an epidemic that Thucydides would later describe as a catastrophe, a moral catastrophe at the heart of a great polis. The illness began with heat, with pain in the head and throat. It brought unquenchable thirst, ulcerated the skin, stole sight, and led to death within a few days. Hundreds died, then thousands. People abandoned their kin, bodies lay in the streets, temple altars stood empty. Hippocrates, who at that time was in central Greece, heard of the calamity. According to some sources, he went to Athens. According to others, he observed similar outbreaks in other cities. What is certain is that he began to write things down, not wonders, not fears, but symptoms. He recorded the sequence, on which day the fever began, when the rash appeared, how the breathing changed. He did what almost no one had done before. He described the course of an illness day by day, noting how crisis tended to occur on the 4th, 7th, or 9th day. He observed, if chills were present on the first day, the outcome was often worse. If sweating came on the 3rd, there was a chance of recovery. If on the 7th day the temperature remained high, death was likely. He knew nothing of microbes or the immune system, but he knew observation. He wrote down dozens of cases, compared them, and looked for repeating patterns. These notes form the basis of the work known as Epidemics, one of the key texts in the Hippocratic corpus. And though many entries were likely made by his students, the style and the method were his. In one episode, he described how the disease worsened after a change of wind. He concluded that moisture, air, and season affect the course of an epidemic. He linked disease to climate not in the abstract, but in practice. When the humid south wind arrives, illnesses of the lungs become more frequent. When the cold north wind replaces it, pains in the joints intensify. He said, when entering a city, the physician must first learn which waters flow there, which wines prevail, what foods are eaten. Only then can he understand that city's diseases. He understood that in an epidemic a physician is powerless to halt the disease, but not powerless to understand it, and through that, to help at least those not yet ill. He advised thinning the air in rooms, airing them out, and keeping the sick apart. In a world that knew nothing of bacteria, he already sensed that disease is transmitted not only through bodies, but through the environment. He described illnesses not as a curse, but as a process, a beginning, development, crisis, and decline, like a wave. He distinguished diseases by their course, not by their names. He did not have diagnosis in the modern sense, but he had a gaze that was attentive, precise, and consistent. This is what set him apart from his predecessors. He did not simply treat. He observed, recorded, and analyzed. He watched how a disease behaved in different bodies, at different times, under different conditions. From this came clinical thinking, not magic, not the repetition of other people's recipes, but the conscious observation of a patient throughout the entire illness, day after day, with attention to detail. His observations about crises, especially on the 7th day of an illness, entered medicine for centuries. Even when doctors did not know the causes, They remembered the Hippocratic days. His method, to record each stage and to see disease as a path, became what later would be called clinical practice. He did not defeat epidemics. He did not invent a cure, but he gave humanity a new instrument, reason, and with it, he may have saved more lives than if he had been a sorcerer or a miracle worker. Hippocrates was not alone. His strength lay not only in knowledge, but in the ability to pass it on. He did not build temples, did not open academies in the Athenian style, did not demand titles. Yet around him a school gradually formed, not a building, but a circle of people who thought alike, learned not by scheme but by living experience, asked questions, argued, wrote, observed. This school grew on costs, in the shadow of gardens and among flat-roofed streets where sea winds carried the scent of herbs. He accepted students not because they were rich or noble, but for their desire to learn and their patience to listen. Among them were his sons, Thessalus and Draco, and his nephews, as well as those who came from afar, from Rhodes, from Chios, from the coast of Asia Minor. They were united by one aim, to become physicians who not only treat but understand what they are doing. Training took a long time. A pupil did not sit at a desk. He lived alongside the master. He followed the physician on visits, took notes, listened, and then tried his own hand. First, to watch, then to ask, then to feel the pulse, listen to breathing, apply a bandage, prepare a decoction. Mistakes were discussed, not punished, but examined. From these discussions a method emerged. For example, when a disease failed to follow the classic pattern, the pupil was asked, "What did you see? What did you miss? On which day did sweating appear? Was there vomiting? Did the color of the urine change? Why did you think it was a fever? What if it is not a fever at all?" Hippocrates taught through doubt. He said, "If you are sure of your diagnosis, you are blind. A physician must always doubt because disease is alive. It changes." This idea stayed with his students forever. The Coan school had no codified rulebook, but it had a way of life, and that way became the foundation of later medical schools. At its center stood the patient, not the disease. Respect for the body, careful attention to symptoms, strict observation of time. These became its hallmarks. The writings born then were not treatises in the usual sense, but records. One student kept a case diary, another compiled lists of symptoms, a third copied the teacher's phrases. From all this, there gradually formed what would later be called the Hippocratic corpus. Even though Hippocrates himself did not write systematic textbooks, it was a living tradition, thought passed first by word of mouth, then in notes, then in works. Some of his students became independent physicians, returned to their cities, and began to practice. Yet the spirit of the school remained. They continued to write, to observe, to share knowledge. And although the Coan school did not survive the centuries as an institution, its approach became a model, repeated later by Arabic scholars, then by medieval physicians and European universities. The very idea that a physician is not merely a craftsman, but an observer, a thinker, a researcher was born here, on an island, among students unafraid to ask questions and a teacher unafraid to say, "I do not know, but let us look together." Thus medical science was born, not through revelation, but through conversation, reasoning, and observation. What we now call a school began with this group of people who had no main building but possessed what mattered most, the transmission of experience. When we speak today of the works of Hippocrates, we imagine a single man bending over parchment, line after line, creating the foundation of a new science. The truth is more complex. So far as we can tell, Hippocrates wrote little, and he likely wrote not for fame or for history, but for himself and his students. Most of the texts now gathered under the title Corpus Hippocraticum appeared at different times, in different places, written by different people. This is not a single work, but a mosaic of voices assembled under one name. The Hippocratic corpus comprises about 60 treatises. Among them are notes on diseases, descriptions of procedures, advice on diet, hygiene, prognosis, weather, surgery, and even anatomy and reproduction. Some are written in a strict, restrained style. Others are emotional and vivid. Some bristle with precise observation. Others bear conjectures and traces of ancient natural philosophy. Antique scholars already doubted whether all of these texts belonged to one man. Galen, for example, was struck by the differences in style. Modern researchers confirm that the corpus was compiled over several centuries. Part of it was perhaps dictated by Hippocrates himself, part written by his students, part added later, when the name of Hippocrates became an authority, almost a mark of quality. Even so, several treatises stand out, for depth, for coherence, and for a characteristic approach to medicine as the art of observation. One is On Airs, Waters, and Places, essentially the first medical study of how climate, geography, and way of life influence health. There the author insists that when a physician comes to an unfamiliar city, he must first study the water people use, the prevailing winds, the layout of the streets, and dietary habits. Only then can he understand which illnesses are common there and how they develop. The idea is strikingly modern. The seeds of epidemiology, social medicine, and the ecology of health are already present. Another key text is Prognostics, an attempt to systematize the course of disease, which signs herald recovery, which warn of crisis, which foretell inevitable death. There is no fear of death here, only respect for its predictability. The physician, the author believes, must not promise salvation, but he must be able to say, tomorrow will be better, or it will not. Attention to detail, skin color, body temperature, the smell of the breath, pulse, excretions, makes this one of the earliest guides to clinical diagnosis. Finally, the aphorisms, the most famous and most enigmatic text, consists of brief statements, sometimes almost poetic. Life is short, art long, opportunity fleeting, experiment treacherous, judgment difficult. These sentences are flashes of thought, observation, and paradox. Some consider them the notes of Hippocrates himself. Others see a collection of sayings by various physicians. Yet in them we hear his spirit. Observe, do not hurry, learn from the body, from time and nature. Not all the treatises have stood the test of time equally well. Some now seem naive. Others contain anatomical errors and theories of humors and balances later overturned by science. But that is not what matters. What matters is how they look at illness, not as a curse, but as a phenomenon to be studied, and how they look at the physician, not as a magician, but as a servant of reason. Even if Hippocrates did not personally write half of these works, his influence runs through them, for they all voice the essential truth. A physician is the one who knows how to see. Even those who have never held a single medical text in their hands have heard of it. It is quoted in universities, at graduation ceremonies, in films, and in novels. It has become a symbol of ethics, honesty, and humanity, and at the same time, one of the most misunderstood documents in history. The Hippocratic Oath. It sounds solemn, yet when one actually reads the text, it turns out to be quite different from what people imagine. First of all, what does it actually say? In the original Greek version preserved within the Hippocratic corpus, the physician swears to offer sacrifices to Apollo, Asclepius, Hygeia, and Panacea, the gods of medicine, to honor his teachers as he would his parents, and to share knowledge with their descendants, to do no harm to the sick, to give no poison, even if asked, to prescribe no abortive remedies, not to use the knife, especially for removing stones, that being the craft of trained specialists, and to keep the secrets of the patient. There is no mention of serving humanity, fighting pain, or devoting oneself to science. All of that came centuries later. The Greek oath was concrete and ritualistic. It bore the marks of cult and of guild solidarity rather than of universal humanism. Was it written by Hippocrates himself? Scholars have debated this for many centuries. Most agree that it was not. The oath most likely appeared somewhat later, perhaps in the 4th or 3rd century before our era, among his followers. It reflects the spirit of the Coan school, but was probably not composed by the master himself. Nevertheless, it conveys with striking accuracy the system of values he lived by. The foundation of the oath is restraint and respect for life. The physician in it is not all-powerful, not a judge, not an executioner. He does not interfere without need, does not use force to harm, does not take on what he does not know, and does not betray what was entrusted to him. He is a servant of reason and of life. One of the most remarkable lines in the oath is the prohibition of surgical operations. I will not cut, especially for stone, but will leave this work to those who practice this craft. This is an acknowledgement of limits. The Hippocratic physician does not do everything. He knows where his competence ends, and in that lies true professionalism. The oath also emphasizes ethical continuity. The teacher is almost like a father. The student not merely a listener, but a member of the family. It mirrors the structure of the Coan school, where study was life shared, an education not only of knowledge but of spirit. Over the centuries, the oath was rewritten and adapted. In the Middle Ages, Christian monasteries removed the names of pagan gods. In the Renaissance, it was read in Latin. In the 19th century, it became a moral code. In the 20th, almost a manifesto of humanistic medicine. The Hippocratic Oaths recited by today's medical graduates are not the original text. They are reinterpretations. Yet the power of the image remains. The physician is not merely a specialist. He is someone before whom another person's life lies, and who must know where to stop. Why did this oath become a symbol? Perhaps because it expresses with extraordinary clarity the essential truth. A physician can do much, but not everything. And because of that, he must be especially careful. The Hippocratic Oath is not a document. It is a mirror into which medicine looks to ask itself, have we not strayed too far from what truly matters? Of Hippocrates' final years we know little. Unlike kings and generals, he left no chronicles of victories, no autobiography, no self-made legends. He simply continued to work, and in that, perhaps, lay his strength. He lived as he taught, and departed as quietly as he had come. Tradition holds that he lived more than 80 years, astonishingly long for his time. Some later writers claimed he reached 100, but that is likely symbolic. Longevity is a sign of wisdom and inner harmony. His death was neither tragic nor sudden. He did not perish of plague, nor die in exile, nor suffer betrayal. All evidence suggests he reached an old age among those who respected and learned from him. It is believed that his last years were spent in Larissa, in Thessaly, a region of northern Greece. Why he went there is uncertain. Perhaps invited as a renowned physician, perhaps accompanying a pupil, perhaps simply seeking a cooler climate near mountain streams. One legend even says he died on the road, walking between villages on his way to visit a patient. And there is truth in that image. He was not one to turn back. Wherever it happened, he was buried with honor, not as a king, but as a man known and respected. His grave, later said to be near the road outside Larissa, bore no grand monument, only his name. Yet that name outlived any stone. Even in his lifetime, he was called not merely a physician, but the model of one. Doctors in other cities cited him, repeated his advice, and regarded his opinion as decisive in difficult cases. In antiquity, the fame of Hippocrates spread far beyond Kos and Greece. His name appears in the writings of Plato. Aristotle speaks of him with respect. The physician Diocles of Carystus wrote that one should follow the method begun by Hippocrates, and a century later the doctors of the Alexandrian school would call him the founder of the scientific approach to disease. He did not seek glory, yet he became a legend, without miracles, without conquests, without temples. His influence came not from power, but from trust. People were not afraid to entrust him with life, and so he remained in memory. After Hippocrates' death, there were no grand funerary orations, no decrees, no cult of remembrance. But with every decade, his name grew greater, not as that of a man, but as a symbol, proof that a physician could be more than a craftsman. He could be a thinker. That to heal was also to understand. In the Hellenistic age, the doctors of the Alexandrian school studied the writings attributed to him as their foundation. They were already dissecting bodies, already knowing anatomy, already disputing the nature of blood and organs. Yet they still believed that the beginning of all medicine lay in observation, restraint, and respect for life. Roman physicians, especially Galen, not only quoted him but placed him above themselves. Galen, living 6 centuries after Hippocrates, devoted numerous works to him, calling him the divine old man, and regarding his method as the only rational one. He disagreed with some ideas, such as the theory of humors and bile, yet his criticism was continuation, not destruction, a dialogue across ages. In the Middle Ages, the name of Hippocrates survived, sometimes distorted, through Arabic translations, Latin copies, and medical tabulae. Eastern physicians, Avicenna, Rhazes, Ibn Sina, cited him as a source. They systematized his ideas, adapted them to Islamic culture, developed the theory of humors and temperaments, yet still followed his central principle: treat not the disease, but the person. In Christian Europe, his knowledge was at first received with suspicion as pagan, but gradually his authority became unquestionable. His name entered university curricula alongside the saints. In the school of Salerno, the first medical center of Western Europe, he was quoted in every course. A doctor who had not read Hippocrates was deemed half-educated. During the Renaissance, when Europe rediscovered antiquity, his name gained new strength. Artists painted his portraits, always serious, contemplative. His texts were printed, medical faculties began with his works. His oath, though altered, became obligatory for every physician. In modern times, others surpassed him in anatomy, physiology, microbiology. He erred in causes of illness, knew nothing of bacteria, viruses, or the structure of the heart, and yet he is still called the Father of Medicine. Why? Because he set down not formulas, but principles. Because he changed the attitude toward the patient. Because he taught not to be a god, but to be present. Because he placed at the center not the remedy, but observation, not superstition, but reflection, not blind confidence, but attention to detail. Today his name lives not only in medical schools. It is spoken in discussions of ethics, of the limits of intervention, in films, novels, and lectures. His oath is recalled when speaking of professional boundaries. His method is cited when asking, what does it mean to be a doctor in the age of machines and algorithms? The image of Hippocrates has become almost archetypal, gray-haired, calm, with the eyes of an observer, and hands that know not only how to heal, but how to refrain. A man who understood that not everything can be fixed, but everything can be understood. That is his true legacy, not in texts, not in diagnoses, but in the transformation he brought. He made the physician neither a magician, nor a servant of mysteries, nor a priest, but a human being who seeks truth by looking at another living human. He left no hospital behind, but he left a path. And thousands of doctors across the world, centuries later, walk that path, even if they do not know that they follow him.